Not so long ago, Game Maker's Toolkit made quite an interesting video on how to get inspired and borrow certain mechanics and systems from other games into yours, in case you're making one of course. However, there was one section of his video that brought up some dark and old memories. Things that were once put to rest and buried in the dark corners of my mind, since they caused too much pain and trauma. But now, thanks to him, this crawled back to the surface, reminding me again how much I freaking hate weapon durability system in Breath of the Wild.
Like, we could ask, why do swords break in Zelda Breath of the Wild? Well, how does that change player behavior? Maybe players will rely less on direct attacks and so spend more time sneaking past enemies or finding creative ways to ambush foes. It will certainly encourage players to use different weapons and constantly seek out new ones.
Okay, so on one hand, the game makes you search for new weapons, since they all break, but also makes you find other ways to defeat enemies because of this system. This is a sentiment I heard other people share it.
This essentially forces me to rethink how to approach battles. Combined with the fact that I take damage easily and have to manually recover my own hearts, it encourages me to find other ways to kill baddies. I'm led naturally through simple necessity into exploring the game's other mechanics. If battling were just as hard, but I had a sword that didn't break, or if they all took a lot longer to break, I would have just gotten better at fighting and left it at that. I'm Link, I'm a swordsman. Got a problem? Kill it with a sword, that's what Link does.
In the context of Breath of the Wild, I've seen a lot of people using these words. Being forced to do something versus encouraged, they are very much used interchangeably, almost like they cannot decide which one is it. Also, I feel like I need to insert another comment here.
Combined with the fact that I take damage easily and have to manually recover my own hearts,
So the whole manually recovering your own hearts, but there's really nothing special about it. Makes it sound so complicated, like something out of Dark Souls, where you need to take a break or look for a small window of opportunity in order to recover your own health. But in Breath of the Wild is not like that at all. You can pause the game at any moment and fully recover your own health. There is no risk or strategy you need to apply. Anyway, let's get back on track. Now, some of the things he said here are sort of true to a certain degree, but they mostly apply to the first few hours of the game, when you're still learning the game and you are encouraged to try new things. Also, the fact you are limited only to 4 melee weapons that break rather easy emboldens many players to, well, try new things, other ways to defeat enemies. These limitations ultimately have a positive effect on the game, since it makes you engage with all its mechanics. However, the problems begin once you start expanding your inventory. You no longer have the fear of running out of weapons in a fight.
like I said, I would have had to do none of this if I could just sword up every guy I came across. I wouldn't need to learn all these other mechanics, and ultimately this variety makes enemy encounters infinitely more fulfilling than in other Zeldas. It makes jumping into a pile of guys and spamming your spin attack look like a joke.
If the whole idea of experimenting and trying new things and other ways to defeat enemies is simply based on the premise that, well, your weapons eventually break, the fact that you end up with so many others you can replace doesn't undermine and contradicts the whole thing. I keep hearing again and again the same argument. If your weapons wouldn't break, then you wouldn't be encouraged to, well, try other things and experiment. But eventually this is what happens anyway. By constantly expanding your inventory, it's almost like having one weapon that never breaks. If you want to jump in the middle of a camp and spam, you can do that. You have now a shit tons of weapons to waste. Actually, this is what I end up doing in many cases, since it got the job done much quicker than doing all sorts of creative stuff. And by the way, speaking of having so many weapons in this game that supposedly offer so much variety, well, you do realize there are only 3 types, right? Spears, for example, might look different but play the same, as well as swords and heavy weapons. It looks like 3 seems to be the magic number for Breath of the Wild, since it also makes you fight 3 types of enemies 70% of the time, which is pretty embarrassing to be honest considering how big this game is. Now let's get back to the whole changing weapon thing. Well, you can do that without breaking them. It's not like you could have various weapons the player could switch between, and not because they break, but simply because they present various and different utilities depending on the situation. Or they have various enchantments or unique stats. Or maybe certain enemies are weak to fire or other elements, which would require the player to switch weapons more often. These are just some ideas, but the point is there are other ways, and better ways I would say, to make the player switch between weapons and have have them not break at the same time. But let's take a look at a few more arguments defending this system. The game encourages the player to explore and find new weapons.
A second advantage of this weapon system is that it heavily encourages exploration and discourages skipping content. This works in conjunction with the first point. When your main ways of keeping the flow of weapons coming stems from looting enemies in chests, you are always starved for more and exploration becomes highly rewarding.
Well, the game does make you explore and find new weapons, but it does not mean that exploration is rewarding. Finding something that I know will break so easily, for me at least and many players as well, it takes that satisfaction away. Weapons are treated in this game as a consumable. I mean, what I said in my Assassin's Creed Valhalla video response still holds true.
Improve them. And this is actually why I think Breath of the Wild's weapon durability system isn't actually that bad. People bashed on it, found it inconvenient, and that was kind of the point. When your weapons broke down, it forced you to go out into the world, explore, and find new ones to replace the broken ones with. It's a very simple concept, but it's one that worked fantastically well to encourage that exploration loop in Breath of the Wild.
That is probably the worst type of incentive to explore I could think of. We are going to break all your weapons, so you always have to find new ones. Here's a question: how encouraged you feel to explore and find new weapons when you know they break after one fight? Let's say you find a really awesome one that looks really fancy and you are really eager to use it, but then you realize, oh shite, it breaks like in 10 swings. Doesn't take that reward and satisfaction away? Because in my case, sure it did. Moreover, this shitty system look praises, encourage the player to hold on certain weapons and not to use them for the fear of breaking. After a certain point, I didn't care anymore what I was using in combat, since I knew it was going to break anyway, and the next thing I find will break as well, so no real reason to be invested in loot at all. Also regarding the whole part of not skipping content, I'm not sure how true is that. Many times the stuff enemies drop is below what I currently hold, which made me skip plenty of encounters quite often, engaging with a group of enemies only to realize the stuff I got in return is very crappy. It's not much of an encouragement. At the end, I mostly chose fights that I know will offer something better in return. But this also meant I would skip plenty of content and enemies encounters, since it was not worth it. There are also other issues I have with the system. Pausing the game constantly to choose another weapon can break the flow of the game. Even more so as my inventory grows and I have to swipe through dozens and dozens of weapons. This annoyance and interruption apply as well when I find new stuff. Since my inventory slots were kind of full most of the time, I had to decide what to keep and what to throw away. Now you might think making these types of decisions is part of the fun, right? Well, not really. There's a constant flow of new weapons, especially as my inventory expands, so there's a shit ton of time wasted only on this thing alone, what to keep and what to throw away. Okay, so how to fix all this? Well, believe it or not, I won't suggest to make weapons unbreakable. Let's actually use the same framework and ideas of weapons that break. First, the player should be more emboldened to fight enemies without having this constant obsession, whether or not the weapons they hold so dear will break. Actually, it should be even encouraged to break them during fights, as well as they should get something more in return, so they don't avoid fights for the same reason I mentioned before. And the thing they should get most in return is experience points. So now you fight enemies and bam, you see what? 20, 50, 100 points of experience received? Now obviously those points must be invested into something, right? Here's where the whole perk system comes in. Those XP points could be invested into so many things that will make the player's progression feel far more rewarding and tangible. You could have weapons perks, a few could be attributed to resistance, so certain types of weapons won't break so easily. Or you could have perks that encourage the player to break weapons quite often, for extra damage upon breaking. Other perks could increase running speed and stamina, as well as some could reduce the negative impact hazards have on the player, so you don't slide anymore during climbing in the rain, which really sucks by the way. And of course, the chances of getting hit by lightning could be also reduced, so every time it rains you don't have to constantly pause the game and unequip everything you have in order to avoid being stroked. Also, this perk system could provide the player with some unique abilities, so there's more to experiment beyond the same old stuff you do in the beginning. Another thing that I will change is the number of inventory slots the player gets access to. Actually, you start the game with only 2 slots available for melee weapons, and the max number should be around, let's say, 6 maybe? I really liked how in the beginning you make quicker and snappier decisions, since you have just a few slots available, which also makes you a bit more cautious as well, so you have to reconsider and put more thought into how you approach a fight. That's why I believe having access to so many weapons at once just ruins everything. As you explore the world, various camps and even shrines could contain some boxes or chests which hold small pockets of XP points, something similar to the souls you find in, well, Dark Souls. Certain enemies and bosses could drop certain weapons, and after using them, they leave behind some special items. The list could go on and on, but I hope you get the point. Having a more explicit system of progression that clearly encourages to use and even break weapons, rewarding the player at the same time, could work better than the current system, which I don't think it does at all, no matter how much people try to spin it around and defend it. Of course, that's just one solution I'm proposing, but I'm curious what's yours. Or if you maybe like it the way it is, please let me know why. And here is where I initially wanted to end this video. However, I did change my mind, sorry. Because here's the thing, I played this game like 2 years ago, and I did replay some parts of it for this video. And I do feel like I need to get a few things off my chest. Okay, first of all, the open world is too damn big and isn't enough content to fill up the whole space. Sure, there are some unique locations that tend to be impressive, like Hateno Village, Korok Forest, Satori Mountain, or the Zora's Domain, but at the same time, the game has a very procedurally generated feel overall. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of games which uses this technique, mainly as a foundation and then build on top of that, but I rarely got this feeling from Breath of the Wild. So many areas are just a bunch of hills and rocky mountains with the same copy-paste trees. And I know the game has various biomes and environments, like snowy regions and more lush forests and also desert area, but I don't think they make up for that, considering how empty these areas are as well. It kind of reminds me a bit of No Man's Sky terrain, except that game had to deal with trillions and trillions of planets, not just one map. I know the game was made for Switch, and I don't think that's an excuse good enough, especially when you consider how many great looking games are out there. Now, I've seen some people defending the emptiness of this game on the whole premise of, well, the game doesn't need to constantly entertain you, you need some room to breathe. Or you really need all this empty space because when you eventually find something, it's even more rewarding. In theory, I would agree with all these points, but I'm not sure how well they apply to Breath of the Wild. First, you can justify any amount of empty space using these arguments. Hell, why not make it twice the size it is right now? And some could still defend it. Also, the whole when you eventually find something argument, the problem with that is, for the most part, with some exceptions of course, when you eventually find something, guess what? It's another Bokoblin camp or Lizard Falls, or it's another shrine. There's a shit tons of those. So the payoff at the end of that empty space many times is the same enemies you fought like dozens and dozens of times, and many shrines of course. And speaking of that, they tend to be a very anticlimactic discovery oftentimes. They are such a slap in the face that undermine the whole sense of a grand adventure, when all of a sudden you get teleported into an alien looking chamber, with pretty much the same visual design, where you have to complete a puzzle or fight the same enemy. I remember seeing at one point these two mountains that grabbed my interest. I was genuinely curious what's up with them, or what they might hide. Then I spent, I think, almost an hour getting on top of those bastards, only to discover another damn shrine. And another one. Nothing kills more the joy of exploration than being predictable, and Breath of the Wild falls prey to this quite often. At the end of almost every mystery is a shrine, or a Korok seed, or the same enemy camp. Rare were the moments where I thought, whoa, this is really something new. And even when there was some potential, like this awesome maze-like structure, which was so damn interesting from afar, but after entering it, well, you know the rest. That being said, one of the moments that stood out to me, and I really wanted to see more of it, were the sand lizard or whatever they are. I love the fact they were unique to that specific area, and they were not copy-pasted everywhere. The last thing I want to add is the world itself that never really grabbed my interest. I know it's supposed to be like a post-apocalyptic world, despite the fact it doesn't look or feel like that, but the problem is there aren't many stories to sink my teeth into. I know this is the first Zelda game for me, but when I played Fallout 3 for example, which was also my first game in the series, well, it hit me in a total different way. It has a tons of stories like side quests, random encounters, plenty of environmental storytelling, stuff to read and tons of NPCs to interact with, that really made me invested into the world. The handful of quests Breath of the Wild has were rather boring and trivial. Many locations that I've discovered had very little or not at all information or environmental storytelling to reward my curiosity. They are just there to fill up an empty space. So in conclusion, Breath of the Wild is a game that I definitely enjoyed to a certain degree. The plateau section was amazing and held so many promises, but for the reasons I mentioned in this video, my interest, well, dropped gradually, as many hours went by and started to notice more and more flaws. It's definitely not among my favorite open worlds, but if you enjoy the time with it, well, that's great for you. So that's it, see you next time, bye bye.